Hi everyone. I wanted to come in under the camera today and just share a few little thoughts that I had. I've had quite a few email requests from people who have been watching this year of me uploading a bunch of video shorts up to YouTube and had some questions about supplies that I use. So in response to that, I'm going to share a few of my favorite supplies which are typical to see in my YouTube videos. I will do a more technical talk with you later on towards Christmas where I share a lot more of the materials that I'm using in a particular flourish, but I'm just going to give you some basics today. And you can see in front of me here is a gridded piece of paper. Now this is a really smooth paper, and when you practice flourishing, you really need to have a very smooth paper. And I know a lot of people recommend using rhodia paper, which is okay, it's not a bad paper at all, and computer paper, but the problem with computer paper is that the weights of them are so varied that you're going to get very different results. And for me, the best results for flourishing and even layout and design, I really like this graph paper. And this is Maraman Imagination paper, or Memnocene, and it's got a 5mm grid. And the grid isn't very important for flourishing, but if I'm laying out any words or things like that, the graph really does come in handy. So it's a very good product. It's very smooth, it's very reliable, and my favorite material that I use for my warm-ups and for practicing flourishing. I always extract it off of the pad, so you'll never see me working directly on the pad. And that's because as your hand sort of goes down the paper, your wrist compensates for the height of the pad, and it puts you in an uncomfortable position. So this was just a little demo I filmed earlier today, and I just wanted to show you how it shows up on the paper. Now, for the flourishes themselves, most of the flourishes that I film for the YouTube videos are on cardstock. And I get this particular cardstock from the Pacific Paper Company here in Canada, and it's a heavier weight cardstock than what you can get at, say, Michael's or a craft store. It's just got a little bit more weight to it, and it's beautiful paper. And so when you see a flourish like this that I create, in many cases I'm doing that on a cardstock, and the ink that I use is either going to be a McCaffrey black or a McCaffrey brown. And neither of these are classified technically as waterproof. I think maybe the McCaffrey black might be categorized as waterproof, but the brown certainly isn't. However, with the way that I work, I can actually use McCaffrey brown if I want this vintage look to my flourishes, and I can combine it with watercolor or watercolor pencils, and it will not bleed. I really love these two inks, and they are usually what you see me using. On a very rare occasion, you'll see my demonstration done with walnut ink, and the walnut ink I use is from Cornelison's in the UK, and they have a historic recipe for the walnut ink that I absolutely love. It's nice, and it's got a full body to it and a beautiful rich color. Now, the McCaffrey, you can buy it in the larger bottle or the smaller bottle. I have one on the go all the time in the small bottle, and then I just top it up with the larger bottle. It's beautiful ink, and it is made for the pointed pen. And that brings me to my pointed pen. You can see my nib needs to be clean, but that's okay. So I use a straight holder almost exclusively. There's an occasionally I'll pick up an oblique holder. I'm a right-handed calligrapher, and all of my penmanship, my calligraphy, everything that I do is done with a straight holder, and certainly the flourishing. And the advantage of a straight holder is that you can move the position of the pen very easily, where the flange, although it's not impossible, it just gets in my way of an oblique holder. And so I find that if I'm doing large flourishes, I can change the position of my pen, or if I'm doing my writing, or if I'm doing any small flourishing, it is just the most comfortable tool that I've found to use. The nib I'm using is a vintage Hunt 21. You don't have to use a vintage nib. There's other good nibs on the market. I really like the Gillette 404. I like the Hunt 101. And I think the Zebra G is a very good basic beginning nib to start out with. But I just have these vintage Hunt 21s that I absolutely love. I'm going to put one of the pieces that I've done that's got some gold on it, and you will see various pieces that I've done, like the Rinceau. There's just a calligraphy piece. This is for an upcoming class where I've done some scroll work. There's the festive fair class with the carousel horses. So you see that these are done on larger paper than what the cardstock is, or a different quality of paper. So for the Rinceau, I really love this Portofino paper, Magni 1404. Beautiful, beautiful paper. It's 140-pound hot press. And when you see me working on watercolor paper, I'm working on a 140-pound hot press. It's just very smooth. It does a beautiful job. And I think that this size is just very convenient for making these border designs. So I really like that paper. I also really like this one, which is Fabriano Enhanced Artistico Extra White, 100% cotton. And I really like the background it provides for these larger pieces. So rather than being a warm color, it's a nice bright color background. It takes watercolor washes. You can work with colored pencil on it. You can gild on it. You can do pointed pen. Very, very versatile, and always 100% cotton, always 140 pound, and always hot pressed. So that's in way of art paper. And some of them, if I want a super, super white background, so even more white than the Fabriano Artistico, I use this one, which is called Botanical Ultra Smooth. Now, this is a wonderful paper, but I have to admit it's best for colored pencil work, better than watercolor. So if I'm going to build up maybe one of those festive fair designs or something like that with colored pencil or watercolor pencil and want a really bright white background, I'm going to use the Botanical Ultra Smooth. So speaking of the colored pencils, I like to use Faber-Castell Polychromos. I'm going to get my little portfolio out of the Faber-Castell Polychromos. These are they have more oil content in them than some of the other colored pencils on the market. I like to be able to put a nice sharp point on them, and the Faber-Castell Polychromos allow you to put a nice sharp point on it without that point breaking. To get that sharp point, I use a Rapesco 64 pencil sharpener. That gives me a beautiful sharp point. And Faber-Castell has a counterpart to these Polychromos pencils, which is their Albric Durer line, which is the watercolor pencils. Now, in many ways, they're just a little bit more smooth than the colored pencil, but you have the added advantage of being able to blend them out with water, which is a really nice sort of trick to have in your toolbox, that if you want to soften some of the color that you've laid down, watercolor pencil is a very forgiving way to go. So a lot of the work that I do with a watercolor pencil will be blended out with some water, and I like to use very small brushes. So one of the brushes that you'll see me use is the Isabey. It's a Series 6229 watercolor brush, and it's a very good quality brush. And most of the time when you see me working, the bristles on my brush are less than 5 millimeters long, or 5 millimeters or less. So I don't work with really long points on my brush. It's because a lot of the times I'm doing very small, delicate work, and I need to be able to control where that pigment goes. So a fine brush, you don't have to use a sable brush. I know Princeton makes velvet touch brushes that are also really good to use. I use a variety of watercolors, and I'll show you my working palette here. Let me just get this out. So as you can see, I've got all of these dots set up on my palette. I dispense the color from the tube onto the palette. The colors that I use a lot of are in the outer wells. Initially, I think this was an 18 well palette. Well, that's just not enough for me. There's a lot of other colors that I like to use. And I like to have a variety of colors, even though I seldom use them the way they are. I'm altering them with other pigments. Most of the pigments in my palette are transparent, with the exception of some of these Holbein. These are Jaune Brilliant 1 and Jaune Brilliant 2, which contain a lot of white. Titanium white I like to keep for doing a grisaille effect on black papers. I think that's very good. My favorite out of the tube green is this one, which is Daniel Smith Sap Green. And this is Daniel Smith Undersea Green, and you can't really see much there about that pigment, but it is a beautiful pigment to combine with the Daniel Smith Sap Green. So those are just a few of my favorite colors. This gorgeous color over here is another Daniel Smith. It's called Rose of Ultramarine. It's an absolutely beautiful pigment to use. And this one here, it's called Daniel Smith Quinacridone Lilac. And without a doubt, I think it's my favorite base color to start with for pink mixes. And I can tone it to purpley tones. I can tone it lighter or a little bit more red. It's just an absolutely outstanding color. I have many different pigment companies represented in the palette. By and large, most of these are Daniel Smith. Now, that doesn't mean Daniel Smith is all that I work with. It depends on what I'm trying to achieve. I've got other paint companies that I use, but Daniel Smith is really a faithful company for me that I use quite a bit. Off to the side, you'll often see me mixing pigment on, this is just a china plate. And the palette itself was meant to have pigment mixed on it, but you can see I've just overwhelmed my palette with these little dots of pigment. So I can mix these little small areas of pigment, and I use a dry brush technique for most of my painting where I moisten the bristles of the brush and then I roll that brush through the pigment. And that gives me a really controlled way of applying pigment to my miniature designs and my paintings. I don't work with big, large, loose washes of color. My technique is much more tight than that. All right, so let's get that out of the way. And I'm just going to pull this over. So you'll often see me put this little burnishing pad on my hand when I'm trying to polish up the gold or get rid of some of the excess gold that I use for gilding. And this is made by the Goldfather, and I believe he's located in Chicago. And it's a beautiful micro velvet. It's got a grosgrain ribbon attached to it, and it allows me to go over the gold and polish it up or sort of get rid of little excess bits of gold that have transferred onto my page. The gold I like to use is 23 karat gold, and this is transfer gold. Now, transfer gold is adhered to a piece of glassine, and it's just far easier to handle than loose gold. And it is my choice to use this. I get the best results with this particular one, Volterra Gold, which I get from a supplier, I think it's called Golden Leaf Products. You can also get beautiful golds from suppliers all over the world, and I just recommend you try it. 23 karat, and if you're new to gilding, try one that is a transfer gold rather than a loose gold, and you're going to have better, easier results to achieve. Now, the gilding medium that you see me using is Mini Autumn ink. It's made by Kohlner, and confusingly, they also make a product called Mini Autumn. And Mini Autumn is thicker bodied, and it's meant for raised gilding rather than flat gilding, which is what I'm doing. But I find that Mini Autumn ink is an easier product to use and a more reliable product to use than the Mini Autumn ink, or Kohlner also makes Instacol, and I just don't have good luck with Instacol, so I don't use it. But if I'm using a synthetic size, I'm going to be using the Mini Autumn ink. I will make my own gesso if I'm going to use a historic recipe on a vellum design or something that I've been commissioned to do that has all historic materials. But for synthetic gilding, the quick demos for teaching classes, it's best for me to use the Kohlner Mini Autumn ink. Couple other little hints for you. It's really handy to have a kneaded eraser. I find that a kneaded eraser can be shaped, it can get into tiny little places. So you'll often see me using a kneaded eraser on my work. I really like to use a mechanical pencil for my drafting of a project. If I'm creating an exacting design, a mechanical pencil is easiest to use. But if I'm just sketching, if I'm just getting an idea in my mind, I like to use a black wing. This is a really soft pencil. It's a beautiful feeling pencil, and I can get my sketches down easily with that pencil. And finally, when you see me working on dark papers, I'm using bleed-proof white, and I have a 2-jar method. One is rinse water, and this is the actual working jar of bleed-proof white. And you can see it's kind of old. This is years old. I will get maybe 3 or 4 years out of a bottle of bleed-proof white. And this was an old jar. And instead of throwing out the jar, I just let it stay white inside. And I add distilled water to this. And I use this as rinse water for rinsing my brush, because you need to load this onto your pointed pen with a brush. So I have a mixing jar, and this is my working jar. And to use a working jar, I'll just show you this real quick. So there would be the mixing jar. And in the working jar, I would just put in a few drops of distilled water. It's always distilled water. And then you just mix your bleed-proof white right in the surface. You can see I'm at the bottom of the jar, so I'm going to be needing to open a new jar soon. That's kind of exciting that I've gone all the way to the bottom with this. And that's what I would use this beautiful brush to brush this onto the back of my pointed pen. But I do keep a dedicated brush for bleed-proof white, a dedicated rinse water for bleed-proof white, and it quite simply just gets brushed onto the back of the pen. And the consistency of that bleed-proof white should be like heavy cream. It needs to stick to the back of the pen, but you also need to be able to let it flow. And that being said, when I load my pen with pigment, whether it is watercolor or bleed-proof white or a metallic ink, I only coat the back of the pen. I like to leave the top clear. I know a lot of people coat the top of the pen. It is absolutely unnecessary to coat the top of the pen. You just need to coat the back. And by coating just the back, you can clearly see where the eyelet empties, where that will get muddied up a little bit if you also coat the front of the pen. And one last thing. I'm just going to show you a few of these metallic inks. Now there's all different companies that produce these. A lot of people have favorites. I'm not going to make any particular recommendation here, but the same sort of working method applies for using a metallic. I would wet this with a little bit of distilled water, and you usually have to let it sink in a bit, and then you brush that onto the back of your pen point. But if I was flourishing or doing a design right after I had done something with bleed-proof white, you need to really clean the back of the pen point to make sure that there's no white left on your pen, or it will contaminate your metallic. Now, use what you have. Calligraphers have all kinds of materials put away. There's really no right or wrong when it comes to metallic. I think there's so many companies out there that have beautiful products. I wasn't going to recommend, but Coliro makes some beautiful colors. These are by Iuli that I get. You can get them on Etsy, or you can get them through Jackson Art Supply, which is where I usually get them. But there's others. There's beautiful artisans that are making these handmade products, and if you see ones that just catch your fancy as far as the color goes, then treat yourself to one or two of them, and they really, really go a long way. This is a lot of pigment packed in there. It will go a long way. I don't like acrylic metallic inks or anything like that. Nothing that I can dip into a metallic ink. I like to be able to control the viscosity. So hopefully this little tutorial video will help you a little bit with choosing supplies. I welcome any questions or comments. You can go ahead and email me or put some comments into the chat, and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you for watching the YouTube shorts, and thank you for asking questions. And if you like this content, I'll be happy to upload more. Have a great day. Bye-bye.